Hi, good evening. I'm Lonnie Stonich, the Executive Director of FAN. We're a nonprofit that presents programming exploring human development across the lifespan. I'm honored to welcome you to tonight's conversation between Leslie Jamison and Ashley Ford. Thanks for joining us tonight. FAN's YouTube channel has an archive of over 300 videos of past events, so be sure to subscribe to the channel to get updates when new recordings are posted. And now for some introductions. Leslie Jamison is the author of the New York Times bestsellers, The Recovering and the Empathy Exams, the collection of essays, Make It Scream, Make It Burn, and the novel The Gin Closet, a finalist for the New York Times Book Prize. She writes for numerous publications, including The New Yorker, The Atlantic, The New York Times, Harper's, and the New York Review of Books. FAN was honored to host Leslie for 2 events in 2019 for The Recovering, and she also interviewed Heather Havrilesky for us in 2022 for Heather's book, Foreverland on the Divine Tedium of Marriage. Leslie is an associate professor at Columbia University's School of the Arts. Joining her is Ashley Ford, the author of the New York Times bestselling memoir, Somebody's Daughter. She is the former co-host of the HBO companion podcast, Lovecraft Country Radio, and the current host of Ben & Jerry's Into the Mix podcast. Ashley has written or guest edited for various web and print publications, including The Guardian, Elle Magazine, BuzzFeed, Out Magazine, Slate, Teen Vogue, New York Magazine, Allure, Marie Claire, and the New York Times, and probably more. She has been named among Forbes Magazine's 30 Under 30 in Media, Brooklyn Magazine's Brooklyn 100, and Time Out New York's New Yorkers of the Year. And now let's welcome Leslie Jamison and Ashley Ford.
Thank you, Lonnie.
Hello.
Oh, great to be here. Thanks for doing this, Ashley. It's like the last time we did an event together, I felt like it changed my life. So I can only unfold from tonight.
It's my pleasure. I have to tell you, I was so excited to meet you. I'd read the empathy exams years ago. I'd read the Gin Closet years ago. I was such a massive fan when we met for the first time, and now an even bigger fan, mostly because I got to read Splinters early. Gotta tell you, I mean, I was already excited, okay? Because as we have established, I was already a fan. But you know, every once in a while, people let you down. I was worried. I was dumb to be worried. This book blew me away, and you know that because I believe told you or reached out to someone on your behalf and immediately let them know how much I love this book. So I'm very excited to be here with you, to be able to talk about Splinters, to be able to talk about some of the themes in the book. I am not going to lie, mostly excited to talk about some of these themes. So let's get started. If you're good, you ready?
I'm ready. And I'm just as fair warning, I might turn some questions back at you because
I'm okay with that.
but not everybody here knows this. I am such a fan of Somebody's Daughter, and it feels like it has been my teacher, both in kind of, I mean, in 1,000 ways, but one of the things that I love so much about that book and how you think and talk about writing experiences, taking seriously the experiences of childhood and the perspective of a child and the ways in which we are fully alive and fully present in youth, and the kind of craft challenges of how to honor that and represent that while also bringing retrospective wisdom is something you do so beautifully, and something that, even though I wasn't writing a lot about my own childhood in Splinters, I was really trying to write my daughter, my very young daughter, as a robust character and to take her experiences seriously. So that was like one of 1,000 ways I feel like I was carrying your writing with me in the work of the book. And one of many things I might ask for you to weigh in on as we start talking about what it meant.
Hey,
So
I'll weigh in on anything you want me to weigh in on. But this is, see, just another reason to like you because this ties in so perfectly to my first question. Because one of the things that I've experienced with memoir, with writing essays, all of that, is that at any given time when you're writing, you are writing from a specific version of yourself, and you are also writing about a specific version of yourself. And those are always sort of the two perspectives that you have going on. And I know from reading interviews, from reading the book, that you are very particular in how you choose the self you are writing about at any given moment, despite the fact that you have written so broadly about different aspects of humanity and being a person. So I'm wondering, how did you decide which self tells this story?
What a great place to begin. Yeah. So this story, maybe some people in the room kind of know the contours of this book, but for those who don't, this Splinters is really telling the story of a particular 2-year period in my life, when my daughter was basically the birth of my daughter and the dissolution of my marriage, which happened really pretty simultaneously over this 2-year stretch. And so those are the two main strands of experience that I'm writing into, the kind of grief of losing this partnership alongside the like true joy of falling in love with my daughter, and kind of feeling my world blown open by her presence, and also the realness of being a parent, the exhaustion and the over and over again of it all. But writing kind of that double helix of loss and joy was really the motivating engine of this book. And I think within that, this question of sort of what parts of myself did I need to write to tell that story? I think that the biggest thing that I was thinking about was how to make myself multiple on the page. I think I'm always kind of carrying that question, but how to write this intense experience of kind of not only role switching, but role simultaneity. So how to write being a mother, being a wife, being an ex-wife, being a teacher, being a friend, being a lover, that comes into play too. Really trying to write kind of this question of like, how does a self feel sometimes even like just like a brimming cup of coffee, insofar as it's like, not only is the self in this book honestly drinking a lot of coffee all the time, but like feeling like kind of brimming over with, how am I all of these things at once? How am I both a mother who's sort of devoting herself day in and day out to her child, and also somebody who wants to keep making things in the world, and also somebody whose life is falling apart, and also somebody who is trying to support all of the young people who are my students, to whom I also give kind of big quadrants of my heart. So I think there was that sense of really thinking about all the roles that I was playing, and how a self sort of grows big enough and also kind of lives chaotically enough to like hold all of those selves. It's that kind of multifaceted, many-headed creature that always interests me.
Can I ask, because I feel like this is true for me, and I do feel like I see aspects of this at times in your story in Splinters. Do you find that any attempt or prolonged, I guess, attempt to suppress who you are, suppress some of those selves in relationships, especially relationships that are supposed to include love of any kind, do you find that hinders your, I'm not going to say that. I'm not going to say hinders. Do you find that has any effect on your ability to make art when you feel like any part of yourself is being suppressed in relationship, in circumstance? Like, because I know that personally, and the reason why I'm asking the question is because I know when I feel like I can't be my full self in a space, my first thought is, you'll never get a full thing out of me. Like, you'll never get my best stuff if I can't be me, which does not mean treating people poorly and just saying, well, that's who I am. But it does mean being able to just be who I am in that space, not having to pretend that I'm not an artist when I'm with you, not having to pretend that I'm not a teacher when I'm with you, or a lover, or whatever it is, a friend, a daughter, a sister.
Yeah, I resonate so fully with that feeling that the kind of fullest version of my art, I think, comes out when I'm also able to live fully into all those aspects of selfhood. And certainly this this book is not about the distant past. You know, my daughter is
Right.
now, so it's not forever ago. But I did feel very much that I was writing this book from inside a space of freedom that was quite different from, especially the early portions of this book are about, among other things, being kind of trapped in a life that didn't feel like the right life, and which is not
Mhm.
to, you know, sort of make a villain of my former husband, but just to honor that I think anybody who's been in a long-term relationship that's not working feels the kind of claustrophobia of that fit, and feels the way they feel like there are many parts of the self that don't know how to breathe, they don't know how to move, they, you know. And I think there were particular dynamics that I write about a bit in the book that have to do with, you know, sometimes feeling like I didn't know any way to honor the importance of his work and his life that didn't involve in some way muting my own. That felt like one of the ways that I learned how to care for him, even if it wasn't exactly what he was asking for, but this kind of tamping down of my own um, kind of ambition and pride. And
Mhm.
and that I think part of what it meant to end that relationship was to try to claim a life in which, like, all of me could, the volume could be turned up on these parts of self that felt like they had been muted for a while. And so
Mhm.
I think it, you know, in that way, when you were talking about the self is always the character in the story and the narrator who
Mhm.
back and like telling the story of that character,
Mhm.
I think that even as I was, and especially maybe because I was trying to write some of these life eras that had felt more constricted, the constrictions of, you know, caring for a very young child, the constrictions of being in a relationship that is struggling for oxygen, you know, that
Mhm.
I needed to write those constrictions from within a place that was more free.
Right. One of the aspects of the pacing in this book that I really like to pacing, yeah, pacing that I really like is that even though I never really felt like I was headed toward any particular, like, oh, this is the reveal. This is the, you know what I mean? Like there's none of that. But there is something around every corner. You've written it in these these bits, these fits and spurts, you know, that feel at times like I don't know where I'm going to be, you know, on the next page or in the next part, but by the time I finish it, I'll understand why I was there, how the story continues. It is something that just continually unfolds. Is that the way memory works for you?
Mm.
Because I find that sometimes when people are writing memoir, especially because, you know, the way it's written, I feel like sometimes there's this thing where you write memoir the way you remember.
Mm.
Is that what's happening there?
Yeah, I think so much to say. First of all, I love that phrase. There's like something around every corner. I think
Yeah.
it's one of my hopes for the book, even if I had never quite had the language for it, because
Mhm.
yeah, you're right. There's not a big shocking reveal. I think it would be
Right.
almost impossible to like give a spoiler
Right.
book, except maybe in some emotional sense. But I did very much want for there to be some kind of surprise for a reader on every page, in the way that there was absolutely some surprise for me in the acts of writing and remembering.
Mm.
One of the things that I wanted to honor about memory, and I think this gets to the second part of your question about like what are the ways that the form of a book somehow echoes or expresses what memory feels like to that particular
Right.
narrative, memory feels like to me. So the form of this book is these kind of sharp whittled pieces of prose. The title of the book, Splinters, is very much about the emotional register of the book, this dynamic of pieces of experience, memories, relationships, moments that lodge inside of us, inside of me, this narrator,
Mhm.
and stay there and are often painful, but are always also kind of reshaping the boundaries of the self in the way that something gets inside of you and then you contain it, you hold it, it changes your shape in some way. And I wanted to honor that with the title Splinters, but I also was trying to express something about the form of the book and the rhythm and texture of the book, that it was going to be these distilled shards of experience that, I think of as almost kind of concentrations of some feeling or some tension. Like if I'm writing into like the great soup of living, like the soup of parenting, the soup of like despair, the soup of like the great big question mark of like not knowing, okay, my life isn't the life I thought I was going to have. It's not the partnership and the marriage I thought I was going to have. So what is it? What lies beyond the doorway of this question mark? If all these kinds of like soup that I'm writing into, I think of these splinters, these shards of prose, as kind of bouillon cubes, like re-extracted from that soup. Like they have
Mhm.
this intense sort of flavor to them. And I think that is absolutely part of how my memory works, that I really remember often like I'm fumbling around, but the sense that I'm fumbling with isn't touch, it's feeling. It's like I'm fumbling my way back to what felt thrilling about trying to write for the first time after my daughter was born. What felt
Mhm.
like a kind of hopeless despair for me about not sharing the experience of parenting in the ways that I'd hoped to share the experience of parenting. What felt simultaneously terrifying and free about the first sublet that my daughter and I moved into with our garbage bags of stuff after my marriage ended. Like I sort of follow those intensities of feeling back
Mhm.
into moments of experience, and those moments become the splinters. They become the bouillon cubes, and I always kind of need to follow feeling back into something very concrete and very sensory. It's something I appreciate so much about somebody's daughter too, is how much you can feel its world, feel its world in the particulars. And that those particulars have the potential to surprise you as you're writing them, and I mean I wonder how surprise works for you, but I think when I write myself back into the particulars of a memory, I know
Mhm.
what I'm going there for. Like I'm going there because I want to use that memory to illustrate some kind of emotional theme, or something about a relationship or something about a transformation. But I'm always surprised by something too. Like I'm always ambushed by something. There's this line I
Mhm.
love, I've told you this before, but in Somebody's Daughter, where you talk about like kind of how we use the expression knowing something like the back of your hand to indicate things that are very familiar to us, but actually like
Mhm.
there's a lot we don't know about the back of our own hands, like all this stuff, all these veins and grooves and
Mhm.
pieces. And I feel that way about memory too. Like there's a lot we don't actually know or haven't fully recognized about our own experience. So when I'm writing personal narrative, if I'm not surprised by something that rises up out of a scene or a memory, once I've really gotten in there, I'm not doing it right. If there's not more there than I knew going in.
I I love the way you talk about the way you talk about prose as something so tangible. Like when you talk about it, it sounds like something that you could pick up and carry. And I think that there's something very specific in the way you write and talk about pain, um, that is that is un I'm coming back to it because you were talking about sort of like the shards and like the soup and the bouillon cubes, and I was like, yeah, I get that, but there's something specific when you drill down with thinking about everything you've written, that I've read, including I'm trying to think if there's anything there's probably an essay out there I haven't,
I won't
but
give you
thinking
a hard
about
time
the
about it, Ashley. You're
I know, I just had to think about it. I was like, is there something I haven't read? I don't think so. But thinking about the continuation of something that I read as I was preparing for this, going back, reading, thinking about, how long I've been reading you, thinking about connections to your past work and Splinters. I think you write the spectrum of pain so well. You write the reality of pain so well without the melodramatics that don't show up in real life, and some of them that do, without the, you know, the consequences that come, and then some of them don't come. And it's so interesting to me because I feel like the way you write to me is less like soup. And I think about a book like this specifically, when I think about Splinters, it is a lot less like soup and a lot more like the difference. It's almost like the quick, sharp jabs of pain are the, some, like there's something, and then the bigger something, the longer something is the ache of suffering,
Mm.
right? And when I'm reading this, I'm feeling you give us like these moments. Some of them are like just beautiful, and like these phrases. I have to read this, because you're talking about your book coming out. I think it was The Recovering at this point. The Recovering had just come out, and it says that when the book came out that spring, and this is about your ex-husband, I could feel him struggling. He wanted to support me, but there was a thorn in every interview, right? And I thought about how, yeah, you write things like that. There's a thorn in this interview. There's a hitch here. There's a problem here. But the book is about the suffering of confusion. And
Mhm.
confusion is painful as well. It exists on that spectrum. So I'm sorry this is so long-winded, but I think what I'm trying to ask in this moment is, why do you think writing the spectrum of pain is so visible in
Mm.
your body of work? And it's here in Splinters, but in your body of work, it's a continuation. I know why I have a preoccupation with it, but why do you think that there's a little bit of a preoccupation? Not too much, but
Absolutely. No, absolutely. You're, you've read enough that you have my number. I would
I
absolutely.
mean,
Um, yeah, I mean, it's an amazing question. In some ways, it feels like the ultimate question, like what is revealed about the self through experiences of pain. I think
yeah.
I will always return to some version of that question, in part because, that's already part of the answer, right? Is that I think experiences of pain show us parts of ourselves that we didn't already understand or couldn't already see. And, to some extent, that's an idea that you find in a lot of different veins of thinking, like, so much of psychoanalysis is committed to the idea that we reenact experiences of pain, early dynamics of pain, in order to kind of like live in closer proximity or in a more conscious relationship to our own unmet desires, our own deep aches and yearnings. And I do believe that like we seek out experiences that can maybe make us more visible to ourselves, and that certainly by kind of exploring experiences of pain or encounters with other people's pain, we can sort of understand the full like rich spectrum of human experience. Like, and when I look back over all of my work, I think the obsessions that I see recurring, which I think are deeply connected to each other, are an interest in pain as a kind of core element of human experience, and also an element of
Mhm.
experience where the point is not to like get rid of it in some way. It's to like
Right.
figure out how to live through it and how to learn from it, and not to be like Pollyanna about it. Like, some pain is just painful. There's not always a moral or a lesson or a tidy little bow at the end of the experience
Mhm.
as well. But I do think that there are deeply fascinating things that are changed about the self through pain and revealed about the self through pain. And I think that's connected to my other recurring obsession, which is like varieties and modes of transformation. Like when I look at all my
Mhm.
work, it's interested in some kind of threshold of transformation. I think the empathy exam,
Mhm.
the essays in that book are very interested in pain itself as a site of transformation. How do experiences of being wounded physically or emotionally and encountering other people in their most acute experiences of being wounded, like how do those change you, you know? And then the recovering is so much about sobriety and recovery as a kind of transformation. How both what hurts enough about drinking or substance dependence to sort of catalyze itself towards transformation, and then what does that transformation look like? And then Splinters is really digging deeply into two more thresholds of transformation: becoming a parent and, you know, navigating a divorce. And both of those are thresholds of transformation in different ways that involve the kind of crucible of pain. I'm thinking about that expression that, like, you know, like you can sit on a nail until it hurts so much that you have no choice but to get off of it. And I think what that's getting at is that, you know, when things hurt us enough, we have almost like no choice but to be transformed by them or to somehow transform our relationship to them. And it's that kind of self-influx, self-being change, self in transformation that's so fascinating to me. There's a Susan Sontag quote in Splinters where she says, I am only interested in other people who are engaged in a process of self-transformation. And I don't agree with everything she writes, but I definitely agreed with that. I was like, who's not? And what would you possibly talk to them about, you know?
I think that's the big thing, right? Who's not in a place of transition? Who's not interested in transformation? I think it's really hard for people like you and I to believe that that's possible, because what are you doing? What are you up to? What is life bringing you? What are you bringing life?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And I get the feeling that you are pretty constantly thinking about if you're giving enough, if you're giving away enough, and kind of feeling I know that art is something, writing specifically is something that you're going to do no matter what. You've been doing it since before you could do it, you know, making your brothers do it for you, right? But it is also a thing, art making is a thing that at times can be seen as deeply selfish to people who benefit from you giving more of yourself away, in my opinion. How do you how do you remain consistent in your art making, even as you sort of are are wrestling with the part of you that wants to give and is constantly wondering if you have given enough?
Yeah, I mean, so much to say. And I also, you know that you understand this part of making art as well, that like, even as the experience of making art can often feel like selfishness, I don't think it is, but it kind of requires you to, like, you know, claim your time, claim your attention, claim your mental and emotional resources and direct them
Got to
to
figure out your boundaries.
yeah. Oh my God. That work and that word. But it's also like, you are, when you make art and when you put it into the world, you are giving the world something. And I can only imagine, you know, what the years since somebody's daughter have meant for you in terms of people not just expressing to you, here's what you gave to me, and hopefully there's something good in that bearing witness to art as a gift, but it also makes people want even more, you know. It often creates not the feeling of like, oh, you've given me this piece of art, thank you so much, transaction is done, but like, hey, yeah, I want more of this feeling of intimacy and revelation and truth telling that I have experienced here. So I think art is paradoxically both like a kind of, can feel like a hoarding of self, even as it is, I believe, like a profound way of giving to the world. And I certainly feel I can't say that with a straight face about myself as a writer, like, oh, it's a profound form of giving to the world, but I surely, surely feel it as a reader, right? Like, what would the world if it didn't have these books that have meant so much to me. And I think, you know, on that dimension of giving, absolutely one of the kind of things that I wanted to honor in this book and was also really curious about is like, what are all the forms of caregiving that can exist in a life? And what are maybe some forms of caregiving that don't get as much attention as what I think of as like the big two in our like American cultural language, which are like parenting and romance, right? Like these kinds of relationships more than any other get so much narrative attention, so much of our thinking about the relationships that matter most are kind of within the boundaries of the nuclear family, whether it's spousal partnership or dynamics of parenting. But this book, Splinters, I mean, because it is in part about the breakdown of a nuclear family, is really interested in like alternative forms of caregiving. So I'm really interested in friendships as the kind of family that there's both more room for and more dependence on when like the family breaks down. I'm really interested in teaching and mentorship as like a kind of electric vein of intimacy, a sort of through line of intimacy. So I think trying to document not only the love's labor of caring for my daughter, but also the kind of reciprocity of friendship as a form of caregiving in my life, and then my relationships with students and my kind of vocation as a teacher as this other space in which kind of like care is effusing out into the world. And there's a moment early on in the book where I describe like, you know, kind of coming into classes with my students like very early on in my separation and just feeling like I was kind of buzzing with this love I wanted to give them because it was no longer kind of going, um, it was no longer being flung at this structure that couldn't quite hold it. And so it was like, okay, where does my love go now? And like maybe that's, you know, the book is called Another Kind of Love Story. And I think one of the questions is really like, where does my love go now?
Oh, there's when you talk about that dynamic with your students, you know, I am the just gracious beneficiary of so much mentoring and so many professors who decided to look out for me in one way or another, to connect with me, to develop a relationship, a friendship with me, though a friendship more so after I left school. But it would be really easy for someone like me, who grew up like me, to sort of put these mentors and these professors in the place of parents, right? Because I didn't really have those to a certain extent, certainly not emotionally available ones. So there's this be, because of that, because I have that idea, I can't help but think about so many aspects of your relationship with your husband at the time, your ex-husband, with your students, and then with your daughter as mothering. All of them seem a bit like mothering, even though, I would never say your literature professor, who is your mentor, is also your mom. Okay. Very, very different skills. But I'm thinking of myself at that time in my life and how easy it is to sort of cross that line in my heart or in my mind because of how badly and how desperately I feel like I needed or I wanted. I remember being in that place. So, can you talk to me a little bit about how those those social skills, those things that you give to people that could be under that umbrella of mothering for them? What, how do you give that in three different places at once? Do you feel in any way like once your daughter was there, right? There is something that feeds you from the love that you get from her, even as raising a child is exhausting. It doesn't matter who you are or what's going on, it is exhausting. So you have that going on. You're trying to sort of fix the marriage. You are doing the mothering with your daughter. And then with your students, there's a different form of love, a different form of, into my mind at that time, mothering. You know, is that the thing that it's like, what's gonna go? That's three balls in the air, and I'm not a juggler, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the juggling metaphor is apt because I can't juggle. And I think what I'm interested in documenting in this book, and really anytime I write, is not acts of successful juggling where the balls are floating,
Right.
like what it feels like when they fall down and you have to pick them up. And
Mhm.
there are these moments where, even as I'm interested in some of the connections between the forms of caregiving that were present for me in parenting and being parented. My relationship with my mother is also part of this text. And the kinds of relationships that I have with my students. I'm interested in also the kind of connections between attention as part of parenting, like paying attention to the world in this like kind of open nerved way, and then the forms of attention that are also part of guiding students through their work and kind of being aware of the world as an artist. But I'm also interested in kind of honoring what I mean on a craft level when I talk about like writing the moments where all the balls fall down, is like,
Yes.
what does it mean to, what is it, how can I also write those moments, those kind of deflating moments where there's not enough of me to go around? There's a moment when I'm talking about this kind of fantasy of being a mother, a teacher, a writer, everything all at once. And I have all my students over to my apartment, and we're kind of sitting in this circle. And my daughter, who was 9 months old at the time, was like in her little jumperoo, like also in the circle. And I was like riding high on this fantasy of like, oh, it's all happening, but actually it was all happening, but not in this seamless, unbroken way. Like my daughter, my daughter wanted my attention. She didn't want 1/14 of my attention. She wanted all of my attention. She didn't want to be bribed with like 1,000 little teething crackers. And I say in that moment, like I didn't feel doubled or tripled or infinite. I felt like half a teacher and half a mother, and that was an important reality for me to write as well. That like, even as I was feeling all of these powerful conversations between the art I wanted to make and what it felt like and how it was changing me to become a parent, I didn't want to write that like sentimental, unrealistic version of the story in which there's no gravity and everything feels possible and everything feels free, because that's not the universe that we live in. And I think as a reader, it can feel incredibly lonely making, almost like a kind of shaming to read overly sentimental or romanticized versions of experience, whether it's like reading about somebody's marriage and like, all they want to do is have intense 3-hour conversations at the end of the day. And then you're like, but why do we watch Netflix? Like, what's wrong with us? Or whether it's like the person who can be everything, be the fully the teacher and fully the parent and fully the caregiver. And so to write the balls falling down, and then the picking up of the balls, and like, okay, yeah, they fell down and they didn't break, and like, what's next, and I there's a question that came to mind for me as you were talking, that has to do, I think, with this kind of that even as you so rightly, distinguish between the kind of care that a teacher gives their students and that a parent gives their child, it made me think about what you were saying earlier about the self that's writing the story and the self that's a character in the story. And in your memoir, and Somebody's Daughter, you're writing about yourself as across a few different ages, but as a child. And I wonder how you navigated the impulse, if you had this impulse to have an almost parental relationship to yourself as a character in the pages, and how you sort of navigated I don't know, wanting to take care of that child in some way as a character on the page, but also writing difficulty and pain. I mean, it's connected to what we were just saying about writing pain
Mhm.
as one of the great subjects, and it is something that you write, but beautifully and unstintingly in your memoir. So I wonder how you sort of experience the act of like taking care of yourself on the page in that way, but also like letting yourself be in danger and in ache and in pain.
You know, it's so, I'm trying to think of the best way to answer this, and I should probably stop doing that because that's when I trip myself up. And I'll just answer the way I feel. I initially went into it thinking that I did sort of want to parent little Ashley. I had so much sadness and anger and joy and so many things on her behalf. And it felt like such an ownership, right? Which is probably the aspect of parenthood that is hardest for me to grasp and hardest for me to desire if I was ever going to be a parent. Um, so I tried to write it that way, and I think I was writing it that way for a while, and I hit a limit. I think I hit a limit because I realized that I didn't really have an idea of mothering. I had a lot of critiques about the ways I had and had not been mothered, but I had never really thought about who I would be as a mother other than in direct contrast to my own mother and to some of the other people who mothered me when I was growing up. So I started having like this whole crash out, Leslie. I'll write about it someday, I promise, about motherhood and wanting it and how do you know if you want it? What does it mean to want it? All of these things. Um, and as I was going down that, I realized that version of me could not write the book that I needed to write. And I need to figure out which version of me could. And one day I was just like, Ashley, you're the oldest of four kids. You're not a mom. You don't have confidence in your ability to speak from that place because not only have you not done it, you haven't thought about it very deeply. However, you know what it's like to be a big sister, and you know what it's like to watch your siblings have to deal with things that you wish you could protect them from and that you wish you could warn them about if only you could, and you wish you could have gotten to them first and all of these things, but you know at the end of the day you're not the mom. You're just the big sister. So you can comfort, you can walk up to the school and push a kid off the swings for messing with, your youngest brother. You can do all the big sister stuff, but you can't really do the mom stuff.
Yeah.
And so once I sort of divorced myself from the idea that I needed to mother myself on the page, I recognized that I could big sister myself on the page really well. And that's what I tried to do.
Yeah, it's beautiful because that's like a way of kind of listening to your own limits and feeling out your own pulse when you write, and like what kind of emotional stance is connecting you to the truth or making it feel possible to speak or starting to stifle the ability to speak. And also it feels like that's a way of both writing, taking seriously that child self as a character on the page and writing her with tender,
Mm,
close attention, but also not protecting her from everything. And that's what's hard when we write, is like, I think, or one of the things that's hard when we write is like we can't protect ourselves, we can't protect the reader because so much of the truth lives in these like truly difficult places.
very, very, very much so. Um, did you feel like you were trying to protect your reader?
I felt there were certain impulses that I could see cropping up in the first draft of this book that felt like forms of um self-protection, I guess, that I had to like ruthlessly edit out. Like there were moments when I could, in the first draft, where I could feel myself trying to get a reader on my side in certain ways. Like there were some very difficult moments in my dynamic with my husband that appeared very early in the first draft of the book. And, I told myself a story about why they showed up so early that had to do with a kind of aesthetic desire to juxtapose great moments of beauty and great moments of pain, basically to juxtapose like these kind of swelling symphonic passages about falling in love and like the road trips and the epic love affair and getting married in Las Vegas after 6 months and feeling endlessness and infinitude, and that I wanted to juxtapose all of that early beauty, put it right up next to this very painful, like fallen place that we had gotten to. And I think there was some of that. That was some of the impulse. This book is really about these juxtapositions between like very beautiful things and very painful things. But when I got real with myself, I also had to admit that part of it was like, I wanted to show a reader some of our most difficult moments so that a reader wouldn't judge me for wanting to leave my marriage, to kind of convince a reader, this is why I did it. Don't judge me, and there are 1,000 ways that I kind of can feel different tendencies rising up in myself and writing personal narrative that are kind of ways of trying to like preempt a reader's judgment, stave off a reader's judgment, whether it's, in some way justifying my actions, or, often for me, it actually takes the form of like very intense self-critique or self-laceration that looks like self-deprecation, and maybe, I mean, it is, but it's also something else. It's also this kind of manipulation that's like telling a reader, I'm going to judge myself before you can judge me. Like, what's the worst thing you can think about me? Like, I already think it about myself, like, and that is also an attempt to sort of like a sheepdog circling some sheep to try to like get the readers in line and make them think and feel what I want them to think and feel. And all of that, fine for it to show up in a first draft. Like, we're all human beings who bring a ton of baggage to our own stories, but that's the kind of stuff that I try to listen for and kind of either weed out or more frequently just dig deeper into, like, whether that's like, okay, in this moment where I'm trying to get a reader on my side, like, what's the other person's side? Like, how can I also like take the perspective of somebody else who is in this moment with me, rather than trying to kind of like litigate my case against them? If I feel like I'm trying to get a reader on my side by showing somebody in some of their most difficult moments, like, then the challenge, the ethical challenge and the craft challenge in subsequent drafts is like, how can I give that person some wonderful moments? Like, how can I give them some really fucking good lines? Like, how can I help a reader understand what I fell in love with? So I think often it can actually be quite generative to kind of notice these moments where maybe I'm trying to protect myself, justify myself, make a reader feel a certain thing, because those are often moments where I'm afraid of something, and I'm afraid to let the old love in, to let the tenderness in, to let not the performative self-indictment, but the real self-indictment, the real interrogation in. And so sometimes the kind of shrill moments in a first draft are like, exactly, they're like smoke signals, coming up from the ground saying like, here's something, like, dig into that.
For sure. And I know I when you wrote about revision, which I think like, because you're saying that and I'm like, yeah, that's for revision. That's not for first draft. I'm not thinking about none of y'all. Okay. This is about me.
Yeah.
All right. Revising mine, Ashley, is the one who will be kind to you. But first draft, Ashley, a monster, a beast. A beast. You never want to see what she wrote, ever.
Yeah, it's funny because when you were talking about like the self that exists as a character in the text, and then the self that's doing the writing of the text, I was thinking 100% yes. And also, like, for me, there are these distinct selves that come up at different points in the writing process. So first draft self is exactly like you're saying, very different from third draft self, revision self. And I think there are certain ways that first draft self is like crueler, like, you know, what you're saying, like first draft self isn't protecting other people all the time. But I also think for me, first draft self is like more permissive in certain ways. Like with the first draft, I'm like, I have a thought, let it in. I'm making an association, let it in. Here's the detail I like, let it in. And then, you know, that very permissive first draft self really relies on a kind of ruthless self coming in
Yeah.
later. Like, that really smart point you think you're making on page 62, like, guess what? You already made it on page 3, page 40,
Yeah.
page 56, you know, like,
Yeah. You're obsessed, sis. Like, actually, you're obsessed. And I'm
yeah.
like, oh, okay. Okay. I call every first draft my Franken draft because it's just I was so it's all just pieces. Like it's just pieces. And then it's like I know all the pieces will make something, but I'm gonna have to go in and make it later. I got the idea, or I got the phrase, I got the, I got something that I'm holding on to like a bone, and everything else cannot matter until later. That's the only way I know how to write.
Mhm.
Um, I've got one more question for you, or one more thing that I'd like to discuss with you, because it's something that comes up a lot. It comes up in your book. It comes up in the lives of people I know, and it's just it's all around, okay? And that is the couple where one who are both writers, where one has a great success and the other one kind of can't handle that, or has difficulty with that, especially when they haven't, experienced the same level of success. um I really just want to talk to you about why this is, mostly because we see artists drift towards each other all the time. Most of the artists I know are in relationships with other artists,
Mhm.
and yet we find over and over that there's this dynamic that happens at some point, where the competition kicks in, and some people can get over that hump and some people struggle to. What do you think the difference is there? And I know that that's a big question because there are a lot of individual contextual issues that exist in every circumstance. But it's so common that I'm wondering, like, where's that common thread though? Like, what is the common thing, like the most likely issue that's happening here?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'll try to do it a little bit of just time we have left. I also feel like it's actually, it might be surprising to people who are here, but to me, it is a question that is so perfectly linked up to this previous question about revision, just in terms of my own process of
Mhm,
trying to write into that particular dynamic on the page. I think I was
mhm.
bringing a lot of just like defensiveness and sort of self-censorship and shame and resentment, bringing all of those to the first draft in the way that made the first draft feel like this kind of wildly unmanaged.
No, she just wants to say what's up.
Hello. Hello. We have
Hi.
a special guest. We have a special guest. Can I say goodnight to you, love? I'm gonna come in 5 minutes, okay? I'll come in 5 minutes. Yeah, I think there's a way that part of what I needed to bring in to like later drafts of the book was not just everything that grew difficult about that for a certain point, but also what you were describing, the kind of gravitational pull that drew us to each other, which was to say, I wanted to honor not just what felt sometimes truly painful about navigating professional disappointment when somebody else, is in a different place, or it feels like it can feel like this finite economy where one person's success is like at the expense of the other. Like that's the
Mhm.
hard part, is almost like the most immediate part to write. But what I really needed to dig deeper and write was this sense of like, we were so drawn to each other as artists, and we really loved and appreciated each other's art, and we were always first readers for each other. And in a way, it felt like that, as this like little micro thread in the book, was a version of something that, like, when we talked about mentorship, my great mentor Mary Carr always told me, you don't write the pain of divorce by writing what was hard about the divorce. You write the pain of divorce by writing the love that came before. And I think in that sense of like, what does it mean for two artists to be in a marriage? That was one vein in which I really had to apply that wisdom, right? Not just to write the hard parts of like, how is there room for like two kinds of desire and ambition, two egos, two kind of unquenchable force fields of like yearning and pride and frustration and all the things that come with being an artist. Yeah, write that hard stuff, but really where the heartbreak is going to come is when you write like all the things that were also good. Like that tenderness is like the hardest thing to reach for, but it came to feel like the most necessary part.
Love that. I love that. Sorry. Thank you, Leslie.
Thank you so much, Ashley. What a true pleasure. I could talk to you all night.
I know. I'm almost like I could go for 3 hours. I have so many questions. I'm like, I have quotes, but we'll link.
Ashley, what a beautiful interview. Just so great, so spot on every question, very listening to what the answer was going to be. Thank you so much for such preparation and such care that you took for the event. Leslie was very well served, for sure. Leslie, thank you, of course, always. It's interesting to listen to two writers talk about writing in particular. I remind folks it's 7:58 right now, so we're going to end in about 2 minutes. We're going to give these nice people about a 5-minute break in between, take care of some things, then come join us at after hours. We're going to make sure Ashley gets at least 1 or 2 more of those questions in that she's got on her list. But come join us, ask your own questions. Come, you can ask questions about writing. Come ask whatever you want to ask about. We've been putting links in chat about how do you get to after hours. Come buy a copy of Splinters from the bookstall. You'll get a link to register for after hours in your email receipt. So we have a quick question here, Leslie. I think you could probably grab it in the next 2 minutes. Claire asked during the event, museums and friendships seem to be places of refuge in your wonderful book. Can you talk about the role of places, and then in parentheses, literal and figurative, of refuge in life, particularly during periods of intense transformation? Kind of a big question, but maybe you can give us a short-ish answer.
Yeah, I love that question. The question is so keyed in to just the heart beating inside this book. So thank you for that. And I guess I'll just maybe give one example. Certainly the book really engages with how much time I spent in museums with my daughter. And there were some really concrete literal reasons for that. Like, we were in Brooklyn in the winter and the museum was a place where we could go and like spend, 6, 7, 8 hours without being in the cold. And there were all kinds of reasons I didn't necessarily want to be inside my home all day. And at a certain point, I really started to listen to that claustrophobia too. But one of the things that I think really drew me about spaces of art as spaces of refuge was that, and a friend of mine says this to me at one point in the book, is that beauty has always been a way for me to feel like fully present inside experience. Like beauty feels like a way to really be there. And I think in a time in my life when I felt like I wasn't living the right life, or I wasn't living the life that I wanted, there was something about beauty that became not just a refuge in a kind of escapist way, but a refuge in that way of like, when I was in the presence of beauty, I felt like all of me was there in the room, rather than that feeling that my molecules were somehow trying to flee the room. And so I think that one of many roles that maybe certain spaces of refuge play, both relationships and physical spaces in this book, is like, what are the places that make you feel like all of you can be there? And I think that's a pretty useful question to ask of like experience, whether you're writing a book about it or not.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Kind of like it's where you coalesce.
Mm-hmm.
It's like it all comes together. All right, we're right at 8 o'clock. Thank you so much. Like I mentioned, we're going to give them 5 minutes of a break, and then we're going to open up after hours. Thanks for joining us tonight. We hope to welcome you all to FAN again in the future. And we'll see you in just a few minutes. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you, Lonnie. Thank you, Ashley.